Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for attending this webinar about the project Evolve, Economic Value of Ocean Energies. We will present the most relevant outcomes of the project, which is funded by the European Commission's OCEANERA-NET program and also by three national entities, the Scottish Enterprise, the Swedish Energy Agency and the Portuguese Fundação para a Ciência e Tecnologia. I'm Miguel Vicente from WavEC Offshore Renewables, and we're here together with other partners of the project, Aquatera, the University of Edinburgh, the Research Institutes of Sweden, and also by ocean energy developers, namely CorPower Ocean, wave energy developer, and Orbital marine power, wave tidal developer. In today's webinar, we will have the participation, short presentation from CorPower and Orbital marine power. Then we will move to a short description of the project, followed by the more detailed technical works, the spatial modeling, the power systems modeling, and the microgrid modeling. Finally, we will have a period for questions from the audience. You may write down your questions using the Q&A icon along the webinar. Before moving to Anders from CorPower, I'm happy to invite Mr. Mike Sinclair, program manager at the Scottish Enterprise, to take the floor and to give us his perspective on this program and of the project. Please, Mike Sinclair, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I'm from Scottish Enterprise, which is the Scottish Government's economic development agency, which invests in our economy, trying to make good things like jobs and innovation happen in Scotland. And of course, we're blessed with incredible renewable energy potential around Scotland, not least wave and tidal. So we were delighted to be involved in this ERA-NET project from the very start. We've invested £450,000 in it, in an overall project worth about €835,000, and it's worth just thanking the other funders, the Swedish Energy Agency and Fundação para a Ciência e a Tecnologia in Portugal for their investment. We've found it great working with the consortium. We congratulate all six of you in the way you've worked together on this project and look forward to hearing all about it in this session. Finally, I'd just say that Scotland and Scottish Enterprise continues to be actively engaged with the marine sector in Scotland, working with our supply chain companies, and also in Europe through initiatives like the ERA-NET and also the Clean Energy Transition Partnership Programme, which many of you might be aware of now. In Scotland, we've got three projects coming out of our last UK government contracts for difference round, which will be deployed in Scottish waters from the companies Orbital Marine Power, 2 projects there, and CIMIC Atlantis Energy by 2027. So we're really excited about that. And finally, just worth noting that the Scottish Government has released their draft energy strategy. And this has laid out a vision of harnessing the benefits of marine energy, building on our existing knowledge and securing a substantial share of the global supply chain, hopefully. So we're very much behind marine energy in Scotland, and continue to look for every collaboration opportunity with everyone out there. So don't be shy about getting in touch with us, and congratulations on the project, and good luck with this webinar and the next steps. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you very much for your words, Mr. Mike Sinclair. Now, no further delays. I will give the floor to Anders Jensen from CorPower.
All right, thank you very much. You get the... So thank you very much. My name is Anders. I'm head of business development at CorPower. At CorPower, we have a vision to power the planet with wave power, and we've been doing this since 2012. We are a developer and OEM of turnkey wave energy systems. And what we have really tried to do is to use the physics to provide a competitive LCOA. And we've been verifying this to a number of steps. So I guess the main reason why we think wave energy is so interesting, there are two things. One, it's a massive opportunity. We're talking about 500 gigawatts of what we call easy extractable resource. And then the second reason is the production profile, which is complementary to solar and wind. And I guess this is a lot of what this Evolve project has focused on, and how we can build sustainable, clean energy mixes in the future. But it is a big challenge to develop wave energy systems. And what we need to do is to reduce the total cost of clean electricity. And what we have seen before, and I think this has really been underpinned by Evolve, is how we can unlock a 24/7 carbon-free electricity system. So at CorPower, we have approached this challenge by really trying to understand what has been learned before, but also, what are the key challenges? And the way we look at it is you need to survive the storms, and you need to maximize revenue to cost. And the way we do that is we are in developing a 5-stage program. We are now in stage 4, which is a full-scale grid-connected device in Aquatera in Portugal. And in Portugal, we have also developed what we call the mobile factory. So it's this type of manufacturing cell where we can manufacture the hulls and do the last integration of the PTO and hull, and then also use it as an O&M facility. Prior to this, we've done extensive dry testing in the world's largest dry test rig for wave energy. For about 1 year, we really pushed the power takeoff system and tried to break things and get the control system stable, etc., before we install it in the ocean. And we have also installed the balance of plant, so anchor and mooring and new cables at the Aquatera test site. And we have integrated the PTO into the hull in Viana. And it's currently sitting on the quayside up in Viana de Castelo. We've been waiting for weather windows, and it's ready to deploy. So I think by this, we just want to say that wave energy has come a very long way, and we are very close to commercializing wave energy to really get to a 24/7 renewable energy mix in the future. So thank you. And I will hand over to James at Orbital.
Thanks very much, Anders. So just, if you could just move on to my first slide. Yeah, next one. So yeah, today I'm not going to, I've got 5 minutes, so I'm just going to focus on the recent highlights for Orbital Marine Power, and some active projects we're involved in that really complement the objectives of the Evolve project and the wider commercialization of tidal energy. So next slide, please. So yeah, we've been just developing our technology since 2002. But where we are now, we have the world's most powerful and largest tidal stream turbines. And we're really, over the next few years, going to be really seeing large-scale deployments of the technology, hopefully kind of in line with the projections within the Evolve project. Next slide, please. So this is our O2. This was launched in 2021 from Dundee. I think it was one of the first or one of the last vessels launched there since the 1970s. So really kind of illustrating some of the economic opportunities associated with building our tidal turbines as well. Next slide, please. So yeah, in the Evolve project, we focused on the grid systems modeling at a UK level. I just wanted to highlight that, tidal stream energy is an entirely predictable renewable resource. It's got wide-scale application right throughout the world. So the conclusions of the Evolve project will have wide-scale replicable potential for a number of key regions right throughout the world in terms of decarbonisation and grid systems benefits. Next slide. So how does our technology work? Really from the outset, when we founded the company back in 2002, we thought that, as Anders said, there's a lot of challenges with developing a new offshore technology. Survivability is really important. But for tidal energy, we realized very early on that one of the big challenges will be how do we create a highly accessible platform for low-cost maintenance and access and for installation as well. So we very, very quickly converged on the concept of a floating platform where we can have that ease of access and low-cost maintenance. We have retractable legs now with the O2 that we can lift above the surface for ease of access to the cells and the pitching hubs, so all of those systems. And we can mount the rotors in the higher part of the water column where the tidal currents are the fastest for greatest tidal energy extraction. We've invested about £60 million to date in our technology, not including active grants and active initiatives. And yeah, as I said previously, there's a huge potential market of over 100 gigawatts globally for tidal stream energy. So an entirely untapped but vast renewable energy resource. Next slide. So yeah, recent highlights. We launched our first kind of large-scale, commercial-scale turbine, the SR2000 in 2018. That was at times meeting up to 25% of Orkney's electricity demand. It was installed at the European Marine Energy Centre there. It validated the technology approach at full commercial scale, allowed us to raise funding, including from the Scottish Government, for future optimizations and future units. So we launched the O2 with Horizon 2020 and Scottish Government funding in 2021. That's installed at the European Marine Energy Centre now in Orkney, and performing very, very well. And it's really kind of demonstrating the more optimized commercial offering associated with our tidal technology. Over the next 3 to 4 years, really what we want to do is continue to innovate on the technology. We're really now start to build that global pipeline of new commercial projects in line with the predictions associated with the Evolve project. Next slide. So I'm just going to focus on 2 active projects, active initiatives we're involved in that complement the Evolve project. The first one is Forward 2030, association with partners like SKF, University of Edinburgh, EMEC, Laborelec, and others. And really, this is about, firstly, really continuing to innovate and drive down the cost of the technology. We're not keen on these long learning rates to get the costs down. We want to kind of maximize benefit to the taxpayer, really get those costs down through innovation as fast as we can. So we've picked 7 priority cost reduction innovations to focus on in the next project to reduce our generating costs and the cost of the sector by a further 25%. Next slide then. And we're doing all of this with respect to future energy systems. So when I say that, we're envisaging, and this again kind of complements the Evolve project, but at a project level, looking at decarbonizing other sectors, looking at not just exporting to the grid, but doing that in a grid-friendly way, making best use of the grid, and then also considering synergies with other more harder to decarbonize sectors such as transport. So looking at hydrogen production as well, and how to balance all of that and how to manage that as part of an integrated project. So again, kind of looking at the kind of more the project level, whereas the Evolve looks at the wider systems level and kind of amalgamating all of those benefits. So I've got one final slide. And another project we launched last week is the MaxBlade project. This is another Horizon Europe project, a €10 million award from Horizon Europe and the UK Innovation Agency. This will be focused on optimizing and scaling the blades, essentially the kind of the power performance of our technology, introducing health monitoring for tidal turbine blades, and really advancing European leadership in terms of composites manufacturing, blades manufacturing, and that circular economy aspect as well. Really, we see the industry really taking off over the next few years. We need to make sure there's the circular economy principles, associated blades before it does that, and that European companies can really capture the vast majority of the global supply chain and really build on the leadership we've developed over the last 2 decades. So yeah, that's just a snapshot of some of the exciting initiatives we're involved in. Over the next 2 to 3 years, then we're going to take all these innovations and implement them all into a single core product, and really focus on that wide-scale deployment as it is in the Evolve project, and really realizing those economic benefits, those grid systems benefits, and the wider societal benefits as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Anders and James, for your very nice presentation and overview of where both companies are. I'm Xavier Ramirez from Aquatera, the coordinator of the Evolve project, and I will just speak very briefly about the project itself. And I will start just saying which was the initial hypothesis we were pursuing when we created this consortium, right? We were trying to answer whether the ocean energy, wave and tidal energy, can provide additional benefits to low carbon energy systems. So we all know that both wave and tidal energy are predictable, or at least more predictable than other sources. We know that if we include them into the system, we will be increasing the availability of renewable generation. And we also know that they have a nice offsetting with wind and solar. So what we try with this project is trying to answer the question of how much of a benefit we will get from there. Which are those benefits, and how can we quantify them? So for that, as Miguel explained at the beginning, we created a consortium. We applied for funds to the OCEANERA-NET COFUND second call in 2019. So we are 6 different companies from Scotland and supported by Scottish Enterprise. Aquatera, which is an environmental company and technical consultancy, is leading the project, and also working together with the University of Edinburgh and Orbital. With the support of the Swedish Energy Agency, we have CorPower Ocean and RISE Research Institute. And then for Portugal, of course, we have WavEC, who are kindly hosting the event today. So we've been working in this project for 25 months now. We started back in January 2021. The project has an overall budget of around €1 million. And we've been delivering 7 different work packages with 22 deliverables and 50 milestones, the last of which is this webinar we are celebrating here today. So to answer that question, we did 3 different types of modelings that we will be explaining now in detail. We work on a spatial modeling led by Aquatera, also with the support from WavEC. There will be some results shown also, of course, on the power system modeling done by the University of Edinburgh and RISE, and some microgrid studies led by WavEC. We will have now a specific section of the presentation focused on each of those modelings. And before we start with the first of those specific modelings done, we just want to say that the project has been focused on 3 different regions, on Great Britain, on Ireland, and on Portugal. Because of a number of reasons, we needed to choose some areas where the resource was big enough, some countries where the there is enough support from the government to support these renewable energies. Of course, we needed countries where the big amount of data we'll be using in the modeling was already available or was easy to find. And of course, we also took into consideration the developers from the consortium rollouts plan and their commercial interest. So for all those reasons, we choose those 3 regions. So now I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Duncan Clark from the GIS department of Aquatera.
Thanks, Xavier. So yeah, my name is Duncan Clark and I head up the GIS team here at Aquatera. I'm based up in Orkney. And as part of this project, we looked at sort of trying to spatially model where the potential development locations would be in the 3 study areas of Britain, Ireland and Portugal to help support the other areas. So the RADMAP model that we used for spatial modelling is based on a grid cell approach, where the model and various data inputs are all standardised to a raster grid cell of uniform size. So I guess for each grid cell in the model, there are underlying data about every factor and constraint that we collated for the model as a whole. The model has taken account of numerous factors that could play a role in determining the level of suitability for a wave or tidal development. These factors were grouped into categories of technical suitability, cost, environmental impact, and obviously users. The grid size for the evolved spatial model was determined through a number of factors. So we're looking at the raw resolution of the data is available in the first place, the study size of the area, and then in relation to that, the computational capacity. What can the computer cope with when running the model? So for the purposes of the evolved model, we determined that an optimum grid size of 250 meters by 250 meters was used for all 3 regions. For anyone that's worked with marine spatial data in the past, they'll probably know that data formats are not uniform. The data may come already as a raster, but of the wrong resolution. So for example, wave height comes maybe in raster format. You might also get vector format data, so it might be polygons or vector line files representing where cables or pipelines are, or it might be point files looking at where, say, port locations are. And we also have to deal with data that comes as text, which might be able to be represented spatially from coordinates that are in that text, but also data might only be available in a digital image or a map or something, which we then have to look into digitizing. But what is uniform, however, throughout all this is that all the data that we use has to be represented at this 250 meter resolution raster grid. And once that data has been uniformly rasterized, then the analysis can begin and the model run. Next slide, please. So this slide, we can see the data sets that have been incorporated as factors and constraints into the suitability modelling, and sort of the overarching categories that each of them fall into. On the right-hand side there is just an example of the score sheet that underlines the model, and this is used really to reclassify the raw data into suitability scores. So each data set you see there is rescored according to the instructions provided by the score sheet. And that sort of determines whether there's any impediments to development, or if development is possible, the level of suitability for development. The model employs a multiplicative approach. So suitability scores are assigned on a scale of 0 to 1. So some data will impact on development's potential in a purely Boolean way. So for example, the presence of a pipeline, for example, might be an absolute barrier to development. So in that case, cells with a pipeline in them would be assigned a score of 0, and those that don't have a pipeline in would be assigned a score of 1. So in effect here we're saying cells are either yes or no to development. Other data though impacts in a different way and has to be scored in a different way. So if you're thinking about bathymetry, there are water depths that are too shallow to accommodate a device, and we know there are depths that are too deep to feasibly anchor a device. So in these areas, a score of 0 is applied, because again, it's not possible. However, between the too deep and too shallow categories, the suitability of the water depth will vary. So we may know that the optimal depth is at, I guess, the shallowest that is getting the best resource. But as you go deeper, I guess cost or difficulty of installation gradually increases with increased depth, so therefore the suitability goes from its optimal away from, as the water gets deeper, it becomes gradually towards 0 at the too deep zone. So for these factors that fall into the top 2 sets of bullets on this slide, the technical and cost constraints, the suitability values can be applied with relative certainty, as we know what is too shallow, what's too deep, how costs affect the development in terms of cost for cabling, etc. And so we can determine how far from shore is unsuitable and the levels of suitability in between that. When it comes to the environmental constraints and the ability to users, it becomes a little bit more subjective in the way that scores are applied. So, for example, developing in a marine protected area might be possible. We don't want to say it's completely impossible. It's not going to stop you if you wanted to really try for it. So if a developer, for example, is keen to develop in an MPA, they could go ahead and undertake numerous surveys and studies to prove there's no significant impact on the qualifying features. But this would be time consuming and more difficult. So it's probably less likely that area will be suitable than an area out with an MPA. So obviously it's not going to have a score of 1, but at the same time it's not going to have a score of 0. So a value in between is assigned. And this is where it becomes quite subjective, but it's been based on all the partners within the Evolve Consortium and their years of experience working with marine renewables in the sector. Next slide, please. So once all the data layers have been reclassified based on the score sheet, each layer is introduced to the model and all the layers are multiplied together to provide an overall suitability value, as you can see on the right-hand side there. So because of the nature of a multiplicative approach, areas deemed as a barrier to development, so those that are assigned a score of 0, will rule out any areas, even if every other factor that's gone into the model is 100% suitable. Just one unsuitable score of 0 will wipe that area out completely. Conversely, anywhere with a score of 1 is not going to change anything, it's going to keep it at that level. So this means from the overall suitability map you see on the right-hand side there, the area scoring 0 ruled out for potential development. This is an example here you see on the screen for the WavEC development here. So the area scoring 0, which the key probably isn't legible on your screens viewing the webinar, but the areas that are sort of blue in the waters around there are what we would determine to be not developable. But the other areas that are in there have some level of suitability, with the areas getting towards the reds being the most suitable. But it should point out that anywhere that's not that brightest blue has some level of potential. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the biggest challenges we had within the sort of spatial modelling was determination of resource potential for both the wave and tidal stream. For tide, sort of previous spatial models that have been created for countrywide levels have produced outputs that are quite coarse in resolution and can be quite poorly resolved or even missing data when they come close to the coast. And the fact that the majority of tidal streams are in channels and off headlands that are close to the coast, this isn't particularly great. So to supplement this, the existing tidal models, we've over the years collected data from various nautical charts and sailing almanacs, etc., to sort of supplement where potential tidal areas might be. For WAVE, also true that these countrywide models are pretty poor resolution and lose the resolution and miss data close to the coast. And also for WAVE, unlike with tide, there's not that sort of direct relationship between the speed of the water and the power output. With WAVE, there's a combination between the wave height and the wave period. And with previous models for WAVE, they normally provide us with maybe an annual wave height or an annual wave period. But that doesn't really give us the best way of calculating potential power output from a device. So for this, we looked at obtaining hindcast model data for 5 years. The data was every 3 hours. So you can also imagine like it's, the data set's in a cube rather than just a 2-dimensional. So we've got the same spatial location, and then every 3 hours for 5 years, we've got a value giving us wave height and wave period. So that data can then be combined with the sort of power matrix that gives us an idea of the relationship between various wave heights and wave periods and the potential power that can be generated when those wave heights and wave periods combine. And that allows us to produce an overall map of potential power generation, as we can see in the left-hand figure there. The same data is used to look at where the best weather windows for installation. So maybe the best areas you think for wave development are going to be where you've got good strong waves, but it's also quite difficult to deploy in those. So we had to look for areas where there was a good weather window, where you had consecutive hours where the sea state was less than HS 2 meters. For tide, the models were based on average speeds at 1 minute intervals over a 14-day spring neap cycle. And we used a sinusoidal model then to apply speeds to each minute's timestamp and use that alongside Orbital's power curves to give an estimation of potential generation. So in both the instances for wave and tidal, it's recognised that every single cell, so if we look at the map on the right there, that's for wave, and it's showing the potential areas that come out. So these like the top 20% of sites, we've taken away some of the noise around the edges and just looked at the best locations for development. But we recognise from that we can't deploy a wave device in every single one of those cells. We're going to have energy shadows behind the ones that are at the wave fronts, and the ones behind that receiving the same amount of power. The same with the tide, we can't just completely block off the tidal stream with lots and lots of devices. So we had to take into account device spacing and how much energy could be extracted from the resource. And that was then used to define final areas for development and gives an estimation then of potential installed capacity for the various regions. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is now getting on to the sort of results from the spatial modelling. So this is for Britain. So this just breaks down the map on the left here. It's showing us the potential areas for wave development, and based on what I was just saying before about picking the top sites and where the wave resource could be captured, we were coming out with the following figures here in the different areas around the British coastline. So going from north to south, we've got to the west of Shetland, west of Orkney, Luce and Cape Wrath up the northwest there of Scotland, the Outer Hebrides, the southern inner Hebrides there just above Ireland, and then coming down to the southwest around Cornwall and the Scilly Isles. So that gave us a total installed capacity of just short of 25 gigawatts for British waters. Next slide, please. For tidal stream, again, these are the broken down into, these aren't individual tidal streams, but these are more areas where there's tidal streams. So we know we've got potential tidal streams occurring in Shetland, in Orkney. We've got the Pentland Firth, which is both Orkney's waters and Caithness's waters up in the north of Scotland, so that's sort of divided. And then various other locations around the sort of channels and peninsulas down the west of Scotland, north and south Wales, and also off the south coast and southwest coasts of England. You can see from the values there on the table, the Pentland Firth is by far the biggest resource, taking up quite a large proportion of the total installed capacity potential for British waters. Okay, next slide. So yeah, the same analysis done for Irish waters. And as you can see there, the potential development is fairly consistent right around the west of Ireland, just dissipating slightly as you move around the southwest coast of Ireland there with the wave shadow. And we've got a potential installed capacity there of just shy of 20 gigawatts in Irish waters. Next slide. And then for the tidal stream, so the only real area that came out of the spatial modelling was up around Brathlin Island here, where there's about pushing 200 megawatts of potential installed capacity. There are a couple of other points around the Irish coastline that you can't really make out on this map. They're quite small areas around Wicklow and southwest of Cork, but we're getting around 630 megawatts of installed capacity for Irish waters. Should say that there's potentially more capacity in parts of the Irish waters, maybe if we're looking at sea locks, which we didn't look into as part of this study. Next slide. Okay, and finally Portugal. For Portugal, there was only results here for wave. There was no potential tidal stream seen in Portuguese waters. So we expected the best areas are off the west coast, closer to land rather than further away to keep those costs down for cabling, etc. And fairly uniform, maybe dropping off slight towards the south, and then quite a shadow for the wave there off the southern coast of Portugal there, where the topography of the land just reduces the wave pattern. So in total, for Portugal, we were coming out at roughly 15 gigawatts in installed capacity. I think that's my last slide for the spatial modelling that Aquatera done as part of the RADMAP. I think I'm going to hand over to Miguel now at WavEC to talk about their Oasis model.
Hi. So I'm talking a little bit about the WavEC model. The Oasis model is our site selection tool. So the model from WavEC uses cost functions to reclassify the aspects associated with different locations characteristics, and basically it calculates the most suitable areas for wave and wind energies, considering the annual energy production, total costs of installation and maintenance, and taking in account the existing constraints on the different locations. During the Evolve project, we are able to develop the tool for wave energy and improve some of the cost functions that the tool uses. So basically the cost functions calculate a suitability index that takes into account the total costs over the IAP, the annual energy production, and this total costs takes in considerations costs associated with the energy converters, the substations, the OPEX, mooring systems, the array cables, and the export cables. It also takes into account data associated to the water depths, the seabed sediments, the distance to ports, and distance to the grid connections. And also requires inputs from the projects. These are more specific to each project. And for the wave energy, we can have inputs like the number of devices, rated power, installation methods, and so on. the different outcomes of the tool. So the most important one is the suitability index that is going to give us an idea of the best sites for installation. But we can also have maps associated with the different costs of the different processes of the installation and maintenance process. We can have maps associated with the different constraints, and we can have final maps with the suitable sites, with the identifying the most suitable areas for the specific area over study. And yeah, we are still developing this tool, and we are hoping to develop for other sectors as aquaculture or floating wind, floating solar, and yeah, improving all the costs and other aspects of this tool. And I'm going to pass to Shauna from.
Great, thank you very much. Shauna Pennock from the University of Edinburgh here to talk about some of the power systems modelling studies we've been doing in this project. Just a reminder as well, we'll be able to take some questions at the end of all of our presentations. So yeah, feel free and put some questions into the Q&A box if you have anything, and we'll try and cover as many as we can. So in terms of the power systems modelling we've been doing, I'm just going to chat through a little bit about our modelling methodology and the different steps that we took before then moving on to some of the results, and starting off in terms of country scale studies. So as we said before, selecting regions, we looked at Great Britain, at Ireland and Portugal for the regions. We then looked at any potentially credible future scenarios for these regions. So we looked essentially at grid operators, at governments, all the analysis that had been done to see what the potential future energy mixes could look like in these regions all the way up to 2050. We also took a bit of time to analyse the kind of wave and tidal resource, the hourly time series in terms of the availability of these resources for each of our regions. And we fed all of these data, so the scenarios and the resource and the time series, into our economic dispatch models. So throughout all of this, we've been lucky enough to have quite a lot of stakeholder engagement. I've given just a few examples of some of the organisations we've been engaging with over the last couple of years. And thanks to everyone who's given us feedback. It's been really useful to get engagement from stakeholders and kind of validate some of our assumptions and our modelling methodologies as well. So to quickly go through our key steps in this methodology, as I mentioned, we looked at Great Britain. So the power system of Great Britain is Scotland, England and Wales. We looked at both wave and tidal stream for our power systems model of Great Britain. And then for Ireland and Portugal, we looked at wave energy in particular. As Duncan has just shown, we identified a lot higher resource for wave in these regions. As I mentioned, we then looked at credible future scenarios. So for example, from Great Britain, the graph here shows the future energy scenarios established by National Grid, so the electricity system operator for Great Britain. The graph shows the high renewable leading the way scenario and the deployments projected by that scenario between 2020 and 2050. What we do see is, as we'd expect, a lot higher renewables being installed in that mix to meet the net zero targets by 2050. So we see a lot more wind in the system, shown in the green colours in this graph. We see a lot more solar in the system, shown in the yellow colour, and also some storage to try and balance that, especially as we see fossil fuels decreasing. And this is a similar pattern for all of our regions. So when we looked at Ireland, it's a similar case as well, and Portugal too. All of these regions have ambitious decarbonisation goals by 2050, and what we saw over the next couple of decades in all of them is essentially increasing the amount of renewable energy in the grid. I'd highlight Portugal also has a good amount of hydro, shown in the kind of purple colour on the final graph here. And so essentially all of these future scenarios were established either by grid operators or by the governments. And we've used these as the basis for our economic dispatch models. The other part of data that we needed for these models was essentially time series data. So we've been using hourly data to look in terms of what the demand profiles look like for all of our regions and what the generation profiles could look like. So, for example, this graph here essentially shows the kind of seasonal electricity demand. We see this, we have much higher demand for Great Britain in the winter months. It kind of drops a bit in the summer. When we then compare what the normalized wind generation looks like, so we're comparing kind of the seasonal profiles for these different technologies here. Wind here is made up of both kind of onshore and offshore wind for Great Britain. We see again that we have quite a seasonal resource here. We have much higher peaks in wind generation in the winter months, and kind of our lowest troughs in the summer months. Solar obviously is kind of the other way around. We get a lot more light, a lot more sun in the summer months in Great Britain. So we see that peaking in the summer and kind of dropping off in the winter. And then we start to look at our ocean energy resources to compare these with the established kind of generation that's already in our systems. What we can see is tidal stream. We understand it's available more consistently throughout the year, it's predictable, and we can predict the cycles when tidal stream generation will be available. Wave energy we find is also much higher in winter. It matches our peak demand actually pretty well for this year of data for the UK system. What we do see is there, for example, are points where we could have, say, a high wave resource at a point when we have a low wind or solar resource, and vice versa as well. So as we've highlighted in this webinar, I guess the key kind of hypothesis of the work really comes from the fact that these resources are offset and potentially a more diverse mix, which includes both wave and tidal alongside wind and solar, could be better suited to meet our demand profiles than just one of these technologies in isolation. So once we've collected all this data and kind of understood why it's interesting, why we wanted to look at it, what we then did was fed it into our economic dispatch model. We used open source software called PIPSA, Python for Power Systems Analysis. This software computes hourly optimal dispatch. So for every hour of the year, for selected years, we're essentially trying to meet demand with supply at the cheapest cost. Generation can bid in at its short run costs, so example, taking into account fuel costs and operational costs of generation. And this represents wholesale market operation. So I'd highlight in this part of the power systems modeling, we're not representing any kind of capital costs or investment costs in the system. What we're looking at is specific years, for example, 2030, 2040, 2050. We've taken an established mix from a credible future scenario. And what we're doing is we're adjusting the amount of wave and tidal generation within that electricity mix, and just looking at how that impacts on system operation and dispatch. So just to give a quick example as to what that can look like, these two graphs show an example summer day. On the left, we have our 2030 GB system with no wave and tidal included. On the right, we have a system which has the exact same amount of renewable energy available, but 15% of our renewable mix is coming from wave and tidal, split equally between the two. What we can see during this day on both graphs is essentially we have quite high wind resource in green in the kind of early morning and the later evening. We have a dip in wind resource in the middle of our day. But as an example, summer day, so we do have a good amount of solar resource in yellow in the middle of our day. We have steady nuclear being used in the kind of grey colour, but it's really the gas generation, so the CCGT, in the kind of brown colour, that is making up some of the peaks in generation that's required to meet demand. The difference between these two graphs is that when we have wave and tidal generation in our system on the right, again, I'd highlight the same amount of renewable energy is available, it's just the mix has changed a little bit in terms of the renewables. What we see is we do see wave and tidal are available at some of these times when we potentially have lower wind generation, but still have quite a high demand in the system. So tidal energy here is shown in the darker blue colour in the kind of cyclic patterns throughout the day, and wave energy is shown in our light blue colour. What we do find for this day is we found there was a considerable reduction in the amount of fossil fuel generation that had to be dispatched, and a reduction in the amount of fossil fuels, and therefore carbon emissions in our system, and therefore also a reduction in cost, as our fossil fuel is the most expensive generator in this system. So this just gives an idea of what an example day looks like. As far as our overall results, what we looked at is specific years for our analysis. I'll start to chat through some of the Great Britain models that we've done. So we built our Great Britain model split into 9 different zones. We based these on data we had from National Grid in terms of their grid boundaries. And as I mentioned, our model computes hourly optimal dispatch, so we're matching supply with demand for every hour of the year. We took hourly historical demand profile data for the shape of the profile. We scaled it up to match our 2030, 2040, 2050 demand. And we used the hourly availability of intermittent renewables, so wind, solar, wave, and tidal, to represent, again, from the same year, so using the exact same base year of data to capture the correlation between these different technologies and with demand as well. We also used fuel prices and carbon costs taken from the UK government, from electricity cost projections. And yeah, our key model outputs are really, we're looking at the hourly generation, the hourly dispatch of different technologies that the model chooses to dispatch to minimize costs. We look at how that changes in one scenario without any wave and tidal generation, and then a scenario as we increase the amount of wave and tidal in our mixes. So what do these results look like? This shows our results for Great Britain. So wave results are on the left-hand side of this plot, tidal results are on the right-hand side. At the top, we've got our cost, and what we've done here is just shown the change in dispatch cost between a scenario with no wave and tidal, and then our scenarios as we increase the proportion of wave or tidal energy into the GB system. So what we are seeing is, like, for each of the years, the different years that we've been looking at, 2030, 2040, 2050 for our system, as we increase the proportion of wave and tidal in our system, what we find is dispatch costs overall are steadily reducing as we're increasing the ocean energy technologies. And this is because, as I mentioned, we're able to kind of displace more fossil fuels. We can see in the lower two graphs, we're also reducing the amount of carbon in the system. And that's because, yeah, we're displacing more carbon-intensive generation, potentially more expensive generation in our system as well. And on an hourly basis, what we're seeing is we're able to use more of our renewable energy at the time that it's available, and therefore reduce our total dispatch costs for our system. So yeah, just to pull out maybe a couple of figures from these graphs, after 10 gigawatts of wave energy, for example, we see up to almost £1.5 billion reduction in dispatch costs for the year. And we see around a megaton, so 1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide reduction as well. I think that might be... Oh, one more slide from me, and then I'll pass on to Elena to talk about our Ireland and Portugal studies. So another thing we're able to do, as I mentioned, our modelling represents our wholesale market. What we're able to do is look at which technologies can capture which prices. So when technologies are available, and looking at what the marginal price is, representing our wholesale price for every hour as a result from our modelling. What we are seeing in these results is, again, for kind of every year we've been looking at, these are GB results, we're able to see wave and tidal able to capture higher prices than solar and wind. And this is essentially because there's a lot of wind and solar already in our systems. When that is available, it tends to depress the overall price of electricity. But wave and tidal are able to be available at times when potentially we have more expensive peaking generation or fossil fuel in our systems. And therefore it's also able to capture in the short term, as we increase penetration up to 1, 2, 3, 5%, we're able to see these technologies are able to capture higher prices. So yeah, I'll pass on to Elena now, who'll talk about the Ireland and Portugal modelling.
Thank you, Shona. I'm Elena Vardanyan from Rice Institute of Technology, and as it was mentioned before, we have been also modeling Ireland and Portugal. So Ireland, economic dispatch model has been developed for Ireland, considering Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland as one zone. We have been choosing 2030 and 2040 for representative years, for reference years. So, and for economic dispatch model, input data has been collected and gathered. So it is time series for hourly demand for Ireland, time series for renewable energy resources with hourly resolution and fuel cost, carbon cost, and of course key model outputs are marginal prices, carbon emissions, and hourly generation. So we have been conducting multiple simulations for economic dispatch model for Ireland, while gradually increasing proportion of wave energy into the system, into the generation mix. And the figure here on the left-hand side, it shows change in dispatch cost while we are increasing gradually proportion of wave energy into the system. And the figure on the right-hand side shows the change in carbon emissions while we are increasing proportion of the wave into the energy system. So what we can see from both graphs that dispatch cost together with carbon emissions are continuously decreasing when we are continuously increasing proportion of wave energy into the system. And we can see that this behavior is consistent for both reference years in 2030 and in 2040. In addition, we could also see that for Ireland modeling, wave energy is capable to capture high prices compared to offshore and onshore wind. So for both reference years in 2030 and 40, it is up to 2 times higher than offshore and onshore wind capture, price capture. In the similar way, economic dispatch model has been conducted for Portugal, assuming Portugal again as one zone. And for Portugal also, 2030 and 2040 has been chosen as reference years. Again, for the preparing input data, we have been collecting hourly demand data for Portugal, time series for renewable energy sources, again with hourly generation, fuel prices, carbon costs, and as a key output, we were getting looking for marginal prices, hourly generation, and carbon emissions. For Portugal also, we have been conducting multiple simulations, continuously increasing proportion of wave energy into the generation mix, and then recording carbon emissions and dispatch cost. The figure on the left-hand side, again, it shows change in dispatch cost while we are increasing the proportion of wave energy. And the figure on the right-hand side shows the change in carbon emissions while increasing the wave energy into the generation mix. So again, for Portugal also, while we are continuously increasing wave energy into the system, we record reduction in dispatch cost and reduction in emissions. And this behavior, again, is consistent in both reference years. Again, wave energy is capable to capture high wholesale prices compared to other renewables, but for Portugal modeling, actually, this difference is not as sharp as it was the case with Great Britain results and Irish results. So basically, these slides here puts together the results coming from 3 geographical locations that we have been conducting the modeling. So the upper figure shows change in dispatch cost in Great Britain, Ireland, and Portugal, while we are increasing the proportion of marine energy into the system. And the lower figure shows the change in carbon emissions in 3 countries, in Great Britain, Ireland, and Portugal, while again increasing the proportion of marine energy into the system. What shows these slides that actually the results are consistent in 3 different countries. While we are increasing the proportion of wave energy into the system, we see the continuous reduction in the dispatch cost and in carbon emissions. So we have been conducting multiple simulations of the all models, like the models considering 3 different regions, considering different scenarios, and considering different years, reference years. And then based on these results, we could actually conclude some key results to take home. So we could see that we have consistency in lower dispatch costs. And especially it is visible when we consider long-term scenarios, 2040 or 50. Consistently, it lowers the carbon emission, especially when we are looking for a short-term scenario, 2030, and we could see consistently like it can capture, wave energy could capture high prices compared to other renewables. That was the end of my talk here, and I will transfer the floor now to my colleague from WavEC, Miguel.
Okay, thank you, Elena. So now I will talk a little bit about the microgrid modeling that studied the system benefits of ocean energies in islanded power systems. So the tasks of these, the objectives of this task in the context of the project was to find a mix of renewable sources that fully satisfy the electricity consumption in the Orkney Islands, minimizing the global cost, including investment and O&M, operation and maintenance. And also, on the other hand, to understand the economic value of having wave, tidal stream, and offshore wind farms, instead of having only the offshore wind farms. This work did not intend to provide, to suggest a detailed configuration for a grid, but rather to draw a general high-level ideas and what are the benefits of the ocean energy. So the optimization model consists of a linear programming code using dual simplex algorithm, and it minimizes a cost function. As inputs for the model, we have the economic data, we have resource and technological data with which we can define the electricity production profiles. And we also have the consumption data, the electricity load data. And then these inputs go into the optimization loop that takes into account also some constraints, and at each iteration, the model calculates the cost for a given mix of renewable energies and also the electricity storage equipment facilities. And then the outputs will be the installed capacity for each of the renewable sources that are considered. We included wave energy, onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaic, and tidal stream. Then the output will be also the energy storage capacity, and we have considered lithium-ion batteries and also hydrogen. And also, well, the global cost is also an output that it's the variable that we are minimizing. That includes, as I said, the CAPEX investment and OPEX. And also we can obtain the profiles of the total generation. Well, we can obtain the individual of each source and the total generation profiles. Regarding the inputs, for the consumption, we considered hourly data for 1 year, and then we kept, as a simplification, we kept this same profile for 25 years. And this was this data, this profile was based on Great Britain's consumption for 2019, and then this was scaled down to the Orkney Islands. And also for the future years, it was considered a multiplication factor that this was also obtained in the EVOLVE project by the University of Edinburgh. And regarding the generation, we took some references as the Renewable Ninja site. Also the Copernicus to obtain some resources data, developers data from CorPower and Orbital, And also the TETIS model from the University of Edinburgh and Plymouth. Sonny, correct me if this is not correct. As an example, the figure shows the bars represent the monthly average for each renewable technology, renewable energy. And we can see also the gray line that shows the monthly average for the electricity consumption. And we can see also that there are some of them, as Shona was already saying before, in the summer the consumption is a bit lower. And the model takes into account the different, how each technology better complies with, matches the consumption. Just to say that I'm not going into much detail here. These inputs references will be available, and some other results will be available on publicly on the project websites, probably next Monday, but we will talk about this later. So regarding the costs for the generation technology and the energy storage equipment, we based on reports from the British Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And this provided some estimations for CAPEX and OPEX for the technologies that produce the electricity, and also for the energy storage facilities. Also, these same reports took into account some scenarios, and specifically for the energy storage, we had the efficiency, we had the depth of discharge, and also a ratio between the ratio of the energy storage capacity to the power of the energy storage system, and this ratio was kept constant in the model. It was also a simplification. Okay, so looking at the simulation scenarios that were considered, so there were considered that 3 years, 3 commissioning years. It was assumed that all the technologies would be installed, deployed in the same year, which is not very realistic, but it was, again, a simplification. These 3 years, they have different estimation costs, and also they have different electricity consumption. The plot on the right, we can see that the evolution of the multiplication factor that I mentioned before. So the consumption profile of 2019 is multiplied by these factors. So you can see that it will increase along until 2050. Also, we have considered 4 scenarios that take into account different renewable sources. There is land that takes into account solar, photovoltaic, and onshore wind. We have ocean that considers wave, tidal stream, and offshore wind. We have a case only for offshore wind, and then a scenario that considers all the previous renewable sources that I mentioned. So going now for the results. We have the installed capacity for each renewable sources. And we have there are these 3 plots for each of the 3 years. And we have the bars the stacked bars for the 4 scenarios of the renewable energies. The main conclusions that we can verify from these results that, well, the ocean scenario obtained less total installed capacity, but it's not the cheapest, the lowest cost, as we will see in a minute. But the scenario for and this is there's a reduction comparing with the other scenarios of 15% when we consider all the scenarios, all the renewable sources, and 20% for only land, and 30% for only offshore wind. One thing that we can also verify is that in the scenario with all the energy, all the renewable energies, the share of wave and tidal increases significantly over the years because their cost also decreases more than for the other technologies. And it has around 17% in 2030 and until 43% in 2050. And I think this is quite significant. So another result is the energy storage capacity. So we can see that including wave energy and tidal stream energy to only land, the energy storage capacity that is necessary, it decreases significantly. And also it's much less, even if you consider only the ocean, so wave, tidal, and offshore wind. It's also it requires much less energy storage capacity comparing with having only land. So moving to the next slide, which shows the global costs. So again, this includes CAPEX and operational maintenance over 25 years. There is a reduction of the global costs when we include wave and tidal. So around from 12%, 13% up to 26%. And actually, the case that we consider only the ocean energy, so wave, tidal, and offshore, it's not much higher. The cost is not much higher than when we consider all the technologies, all the renewable sources. So, still another result that we could obtain is the excess of electricity. So the model, as we have it, we didn't limit any excess of generation of electricity, so we see that there could be curtailment. And we can also verify that including wave and tidal, this excess of electricity generation decreases significantly. And also, it's if you look comparing ocean energy with only offshore wind, the decrease is very significant. It's about 66% less. So next, we also looked at the instantaneous power production of these profiles of these renewable sources in the different scenarios. And again, it's quite obvious that in the case of including wave and tidal, the average of the instantaneous power, the mean it's quite lower than the including only the land scenario of onshore wind and solar PV, and also lower than considering only the offshore wind. The same for the maximum value of the instantaneous power. It's including wave and tidal, it's again much significantly lower than the other scenarios. And again, the variation that is represented here by the standard deviation, it's also quite lower than the case of having only the land renewables, and even lower than having the offshore wind only. So, as the main conclusions of this work, it was possible to identify that complementarity of the production from wave and tidal brings some benefits to the system. So we could have less total installed capacity, less energy storage requirements, and this lowers these two together. We can obtain lower costs. We also have less excess of production. Also, another thing. This is not quantified in the model as it is implemented now, but if we have less installed capacity and less energy storage capacity, this will end in a lower carbon footprint, also carbon emissions. And we also concluded that the instantaneous power, as I just showed, is less demanding for the grids. So now I will give the floor to Donald Noble from the University of Edinburgh.
Thanks very much, Miguel, and everyone else for that really interesting presentations. And before I kind of quickly head into the project summary, I just remind everyone that we do have a few minutes after this for questions and answers, so please type those into the questions and answers section of the Zoom webinar, and I'll try and group together any similar questions for our panel. So, as Xavier mentioned at the start, the key question is, can blue energy make an effective contribution to European energy systems, particularly looking at where, what, when, how, and at what price? And you know, as we've seen today, we've looked at 3 different complementary studies, starting off with spatial modelling using GIS, the RadMap software from Aquatera, to look at some of the predicted locations for the devices and the capacities of installation that we could potentially see in future. And then we had 2 different scales of power system modelling. The country scale economic dispatch studies of Great Britain, Ireland and Portugal, showing the benefits of installing ocean energy in these 3 systems, and you know, benefits in terms of cost reduction and carbon reductions. And then Miguel has just presented there the microgrid investment planning with the case study from Orkney, again showing this range of benefits from that work. So thanks for your attention on this, and we'll move into the question and answer session. It's great to see such interest in the project, and as I said, I'll try and get round to as many of the questions as we can in the time available. As I say, please do add your questions. I see they're still coming in the chat. Our contact details are there, contact@evolveenergy.eu. If we don't get round to everything today, then please do email in and we'll be happy to speak with you afterwards. We hope to have a set of public deliverables which will summarise these results in a bit more detail, available on the project website, hopefully by early next week. I'm aware sometimes the quality of the graphs on the Zoom presentation maybe wasn't ideal, so hopefully there'll be better quality versions in those deliverables. So I'll maybe first start with a question to Shona. And you know, in your analysis, do you consider the offshore wind capacity that's planned to be deployed in the UK and its importance in matching the demand which could be satisfied from wave and tidal?
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, for that question. It's a good question. It's a great point. So yes, in the modelling that we've done, we are accounting for deployments that are happening in the UK. The future scenarios that I mentioned that we've looked at, the kind of credible future scenarios, do take into account the kind of planned deployments that are happening over the next kind of 5, 6, 7 years, and also the aims. For example, the UK government has a target for 50 gigawatts of offshore wind in the system by 2030, and so those targets are also accounted for in the future scenarios that we're looking at as well. So yeah, we basically are trying to represent the most credible version of what the electricity system might look like in the future. And then what we're looking at is if we also include wave and tidal. So I think actually that the main benefit that we're seeing is Obviously, there can be times when there's a lot of offshore wind capacity happening and there's a very high renewable, low carbon system happening. But what is quite interesting is when we adjust the proportions, so we include more wave or tidal in the system, in any of our systems, not just GB, but also Ireland and Portugal, we're able to see, because these types of energy are offset from the offshore wind, that points when potentially we have a lull in wind, we're able to still deploy more renewable energy if we're including wave and tidal in our mixes.
Thanks, Shona. Before we take another question, I see that there's a message come through from Norma Hogan from the Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and I'm not sure that's gone to everyone, so I'll just read that out. She's highlighting that the Scottish projects from AR4 will all be deployed in the Highlands and Islands Enterprise area, and Highlands and Islands Enterprise are the local economic development agency covering that area, and they work with the key developers, are home to the European Marine Energy Centre and Wave Energy Scotland. We're part of Europe Wave, and obviously if you're going to be involved in anything in that area, then I'm sure Norma and the team at Highlands and Islands Enterprise will be happy to hear from you. And possibly now a question for Anders. We have a question here saying, does the power generation capacity of the wave energy device vary from one region to another? And if yes, are there different sizes of turbines for these regions?
Yeah, thank you very much. So the power rated for each device is not planned to change. And for us in our system, what we have is we have a phase control, meaning that we can control the stiffness of the device, which enable us to be very broadbanded. And for that reason, we enable the ability to adapt to short, long waves and also the height difference. So the power rating would be the same. Obviously, the output is very dependent on the waves themselves and the energy in the waves that we can capture. There was a second question in that as well. Let's see. Oh, it disappeared now, does it?
Oh, sorry.
Did you click it? Let me see.
Sorry, the second point was...
Oh, there we go. I'll find it. So, I mean, you could change the size. What we see and what the theory, I mean, why you wouldn't do it there's a theoretical, or I would say a practical maximum. So when you increase the size of the WavEC and the size of the hull, at one point you will increase the power generation, but also the loading. So when you increase the loads, you also increase the capex. So for that reason, we think that the maximum power rating for a point absorber is somewhere around maybe 400, maybe up to 500 kilowatts per machine. So when you build it larger than that, you will not get economic benefit from it.
Thanks, Anders. and now maybe a question for Miguel, and somebody suggesting that it's great that an islanded power system has been modelled. Excuse me. Are there any particular aspects or assumptions from modelling an islanded system that apply to Orkney that would limit the applicability of the outcomes from your microgrid modelling to looking at other islanded systems?
Well, this model in particular, it's a very high-level model. So, on the one hand, it doesn't take into account many details. So, for instance, this could be included, but it doesn't include, I don't know, a grid connection capacity and how the electricity is transported from one point to another, from the generation to the consumption point. But other than these details that we could improve, this model can be applied to any other island. Well, and we can also apply this model not to a closed system. We can include also other sources in the model. So I think it's a quite open model to be applied in different scenarios. Actually.
Thanks, Miguel. And maybe just a quick follow-up on that is, did you consider any interconnectors with the UK as part of that modelling?
Well, actually, we did made a study, carried out a study, including external sources, and in particular, we considered the connection to the Scotland mainland. We had these results for previous data, but then we updated the data and we don't. We're not able to have this ready for now for the webinar. But the conclusion is mostly the same. So as long as we considered a limitation on the power transmission, and we varied the costs to import and the costs of selling this electricity. And as we increase the costs, even be it to sell or to buy, the wave and tidal will have more and more relevance in the system grid.
Thanks very much, Miguel. This one possibly Shona can answer. And looking at the for the power systems modelling studies, what were the marginal costs considered for ocean energy, and how were they determined?
Sure, thanks very much. So I guess within the inputs for our power systems modelling, in terms of the marginal cost for ocean energy, we've essentially assumed that all intermittent renewables are bidding into the wholesale market essentially at zero costs. So yeah, all of these types of renewable energy, so wave, tidal, wind, solar, what they're doing is they're taking the marginal cost set by whatever marginal generator, the most expensive generator is for every hour that is required to meet demand. So when we presented, some of these costs that are captured by different technologies, what we're showing there essentially is the prices that the generators are allowed to take. And essentially it's usually the more expensive generation like gas that's kind of meeting the kind of peak hourly demand that is really kind of setting those prices for most of the time.
Thanks, Shona. And you know, the question that we always get in these things is people asking what the levelized cost of energy for the devices are, and I wonder if I can maybe go to Anders on that.
Yeah, that's the big question always. So when we look at it, obviously we start off high for the first 10 megawatt arrays that we will build. I think we're aiming at around 250 euros per megawatt hour, which is on par with floating wind and other renewable technologies for the first project. But what we see is already at 600 megawatts installed, we get to about 70 euros per megawatt hour, which is significantly lower than most other renewables that we've seen can get to with so little installed capacity. And that is mainly due to the structural efficiency of the technology, meaning the amount of power we can get out with a certain amount of material used. So, and long term, we think we can get down to 35 euros per megawatt hour with this technology. So certainly can compete head to head on LCOE. But then looking at the capture price, that's where we see the great opportunities with wave energy, is that the levelized value of electricity is significantly higher, and that's why wave energy is, I think, a key technology going forward. So I also urge everyone to maybe not only focus on LCOE, but also focus on levelized value of electricity, and I think this study really proves that point.
Thanks, Anders. It's always interesting to hear some numbers on LCOE, but also as this project has shown, that's not the only metric that we should be considering. There's a few more questions, and hopefully we can cut on for a few more minutes here. I see that there's a question here about the cost capture prices of energy, looking at maintenance costs, and the wind generation sector is higher than hydro and solar. And is there anyone that wants to comment on that and how that would be for ocean energy?
I guess I can only comment in terms of what we've included within the modelling studies that we've done. So I guess it's not been within kind of the scope of our work to look at potentially a cost-benefit analysis of those capture prices that we've been quantifying versus the maintenance costs that would be included. But yeah, I guess certainly true that we do see slightly higher maintenance costs happening for offshore generation compared with onshore generation.
Yeah, okay then. Hopefully that partially answers the question at least. And maybe one final question here is, regarding the models, are they going to be available for others to use in other scenarios with other cost factors or weighting?
I can give a quick answer to that, and yes, some of them will be. So the kind of open source pipes, power systems, dispatch models that we've been creating, for example, GB, Ireland and Portugal, those are all, yeah, we're happy to share those. That's all been publicly available data, and we can make those public alongside some of the deliverables over the next couple of weeks. As far as I understand, the kind of spatial modelling and the microgrid modelling are based within Aquatera and WavEC specifically, but I'm sure they're happy to talk to anyone about potential collaborations and future projects using those models as well. I'm sure, yeah, we could look at, for example, all kinds of different kind of weighting, cost functions, different areas, different data inputs as well.
Thanks for that, Shona. Well, see, we've run over a little bit on timing, so maybe we'll wrap up there. But just to say that in terms of next steps, we hope to have some technical notes summarising the 3 sets of modelling available on the Evolve project website, evolveenergy.eu. And we hope to have those up next week. And then following on from that, in the weeks and months to come, we hope to have some technical journal papers going into those methodology and results in some more detail. So watch this space. That will be available on various social media platforms such as LinkedIn. So thanks again, everyone, for your attention. Sorry, I'm just being reminded that yes, we will try and make the recording of this webinar available for anyone who was not able to attend or was able to attend part of it. So if you have colleagues that would you think would enjoy this webinar, then let them know, and we will have that available on the project website hopefully next week. And so with that, I thank you all for your attention, and good afternoon. Bye.